without concern for their well-being. The California jury's decision on Wednesday is a first-of-its-kind lawsuit, and it could influence the outcome of thousands of similar lawsuits accusing social media companies of deliberately causing harm. The plaintiff, known by her initials KGM, testified at trial that she became addicted to social media as a child and that this addiction exacerbated her mental health struggles. After more than 40 hours of deliberations, the majority of jurors agreed and awarded her $3 million in damages. Jurors later recommended an additional $3 million in punitive damages after deciding the companies acted with malice, oppression, or fraud in harming children with their platforms. The judge has final say over how much damages are awarded. Now, it's the second verdict against Meta this week after a jury in New Mexico determined the company harms children's mental health and safety in violation of state law. Meta, the parent of Instagram and Facebook and Google-owned YouTube, issued statements disagreeing with the verdict and vowed to explore their legal options, which include appeals. A lot to talk about here, bringing in Star Kashman, founding partner of cyber law firm. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning to join us on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you for having me.
This is being called a first-of-its-kind verdict. So what makes this case legally different from previous lawsuits against social media companies?
In previous lawsuits against these social media companies were able to lean on laws like Section 230 and free speech to escape liability and not even get towards the point of a case where evidence could be reviewed or made public for other individuals to know the inner workings of these platforms. So in those past cases, Meta, YouTube, all of the big tech companies were able to say this issue is something that regulates third-party content, meaning it's out of our hands and we're protected under Section 230, which says tech platforms aren't liable for content that third-party users put out. This case in particular really focused on the programming, the build, and the addictive design of these algorithms. And that is actually the company's doing and the company's actions. And this was really the first time that we saw any case of this kind go in front of a jury and allow the public to decide whether these platforms were designed in a deliberate and harmful manner.
So the jury found that platform design caused harm as well here. When comparing the content on the platforms to the design, how significant is that distinction, especially given protections under Section 230? I know that's a lot to break down there, but for our audience, can you just explain that to us?
Yeah, of course. That distinction is really everything. There even have been cases in the past that really boiled down to issues with the algorithm and its programming. But in the past, Meta, YouTube, and all of these other big tech platforms were able to push the case towards focusing more on the regulation of user content. Obviously, with that, as mentioned before, Section 230 and free speech comes up, and those are issues that the courts take very seriously. So the fact that this case really hinged on the actual design of the product and these big tech platforms programming of how exactly they made these algorithms so addictive, that's exactly what is so important about this case and why this case got to a point where we could see evidence and a jury could decide, and some of the internal documents obviously were made public. But in tech law, that is really the distinction that allows people to determine whether or not a platform will be held liable for damages being brought forth.
And can you explain what it means legally that the companies were found negligent in their design when the jury is, trying to think of a conclusion to come to? What was going through the jury's heads with that decision?
The jury was really considering what a reasonable platform that was in Meta.
ZipRecruiter. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Really?
Yeah.
To compare it with really
to what was going through the jury's heads with that decision?
The jury was really considering what a reasonable platform that was in Meta or Google's shoes would have done in this situation. They had to compare it with what the average person or business in that kind of situation would have or should have done if they were exercising reasonable care to protect users and uphold their duties they have in that regard. So the jury really, in this case, determined that they did not exercise reasonable care that is of an equivalent level to what they would consider other individuals to have to exercise.
And something interesting about this, Star, is the jury also awarded punitive damages, saying the companies acted with malice, oppression, and fraud. That's a pretty high bar. So what was the evidence like there when we're talking about reaching that conclusion as well?
Yeah, that was a very interesting part of the case. And it's also a unique part of this case because, like I said, due to the lack of the Section 230 issue, throwing the case out before it even got to evidence or testimony of these big tech executives, we really here got to see things like internal documentation, internal emails, some scientific studies that were conducted. And we were able to really see the fact that these tech companies were aware of these harms being committed, and they chose profit and engagement over the protection of their vulnerable user base.
And something I found pretty interesting, and I'm going to just read my notes here because Meta was assigned 70% of the responsibility. How did juries determine that kind of split between the companies?
Juries really have to weigh who they think is most responsible for the damages that are at play here. And I think that based off what we discussed earlier with the evidence, obviously most of the public knows that whistleblowers in the past who have worked for Meta have said that they've brought up very valid concerns and have been ignored while working for Meta. And with all these extra internal documents leaked and being brought forth to the public through this case, there was a huge amount of evidence that was very damning and very damaging to Meta's reputation here. We really just saw that the jury leaned towards probably a lot of the evidence that they were shown to see how much Meta compared to Google/YouTube really was responsible for the damages in these cases caused to the plaintiff.
We do know these companies said they are going to appeal. So what are their legal arguments, and really how would that play out?
So I expect their legal arguments, as usual, to fall back on their typical Section 230 and free speech arguments, trying to make it seem like this case is actually about third-party content, but something that's more unique and I think a newer theme that's being brought up here is focusing reasonably so on causation. Now, this is extra interesting because I don't only see it as a legal argument, but I also see it as a psychological argument. As we know, obviously, there are thousands of other similar cases pending. Now, there are multiple ways for a company to prevent themselves from those floodgates getting open. Yes, one is winning a case with a jury deciding, but another could potentially be psychologically convincing people not to bring these cases. Most of these cases are brought by children who were harmed, by their parents who lost children, who maybe committed suicide or were murdered as a result of these platforms. And really, the causation argument, which is very relevant to the negligent causes of action, in this case, that is really, really vital. And getting causation to be questioned is something that could put the case at risk if it's challenged. And it also will set forth an image to the public that if you are a child and you bring a case against us, or if you are a parent and you bring a case against us, we will air your dirty laundry too, to try to say that life happens. Maybe you had a divorce going on, maybe you had an abusive relative, and we're going to put that forth to the public so that parents maybe who had their kid commit suicide would be uncomfortable reliving all of that trauma and then themselves getting questioned as parents, or a child bringing forth this case being vulnerable enough to disclose eating disorders, suicidal ideation, would be uncomfortable having themselves blamed and external factors blamed and having their lives put on stand like that too, just for bringing forth their claims as a victim.
And Star, we've been having our viewers voting here. Do they agree with the verdict in the social media addiction trial? A lot of them saying yes, some saying no. My question for you, and we touched on this a little bit, but looking ahead, could this verdict open the door to broader regulation or fundamentally change how social media companies design their platforms, especially when we're talking about younger users, because that's really where a lot of the concern lies here for these parents?
So it certainly could. I would say that in tech law, what we have seen, especially plaintiffs' attorneys, we've seen that some of these platforms have to be unfortunately forced to implement safe measures and build safer platforms. They do have the ability to do so. This is something that was less clear to the courts until we were slowly able to see more and more evidence of the inner workings of these tech platforms, but something that those of us that are in the tech community were well aware of. But really, this will obviously put a public push towards, first off, knowing the realities of what goes on these platforms, who's running it, and seeing even internal documentation and correspondence about the knowledge of how harmful it is and choosing to move forward swiftly with that. But as I said, with them being forced, if there's an issue with this case where it ends up getting challenged, that would be a concern, because some of these platforms, as said before, they might not necessarily be ethically motivated as the average individual might be. So they might be more financially motivated. So knowing that they have a higher chance now of being held liable for their platform design definitely does show that they will likely and should be implementing better safeguards next time to prevent themselves from being held liable and also to protect their users, which is what's most important.
Star, is there anything else you'd like to add about this discussion that you think I might have missed? I know this is so much information, a lot to talk about. We covered a lot, but is there anything that you think the viewers need to know?
I think that this is a really good step in the right direction, but we really can't stop fighting. We really have to make our voices heard and show these platforms that we want them to use all the tools at their disposal, to use all the knowledge that they have to protect users. I don't think that the public is necessarily seeking a full social media platform ban, and I disagree with those that think that this one step towards a safer digital age will crumble all of social media, AI, and big tech companies. This actually is a path forward to a safer digital age where we can dominate in the AI field, dominate in technology, continue to evolve and grow and learn in the digital age, while also keeping our children safe, keeping future generations safe, and really protecting the citizens of the United States.
All right, Star Kashman, thank you as always for coming on the show. We appreciate having you this morning.
Thank you.
And let's look at that poll one more time. Thank you to our Live Now viewers for weighing in. Do you agree with the verdict in the social media addiction trial? 59% of you saying yes, 41% of you saying no. All right, stepping away for a commercial break. Don't go anywhere. Lots of news to get to today on Live Now from Fox.